All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Kidlit Distancing Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider, and we have an awesome guest tonight. If you are joining us for the first time and you want to get on our list and get notified of all of our social guests and all the other cool stuff we do, go to writeforkids.org/ultimate cheat sheet. And you will get on our list. And also you will get a free ebook, The Ultimate Children's Writing Cheat Sheet, where we've compiled 30 years of info on how to get started writing for children in one free ebook. And actually, I need to change this slide. I meant to do it for this week. We are now in our 31st year of business. So it's 31 years of children's writing knowledge. Even better. And if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, this is our sort of flagship product that started in May of 1990. We have a special $5 a month price for our socialites. writeforkids.org/CBI will get you there. Comes out every month, about 20 pages delivered to your inbox. We have market info. We have articles on writing and the business side of publishing and all kinds of stuff, interviews with agents, editors, authors, and one special above the slush pile code every month from either an agent or an editor that you could use to jump over the slush pile with your submission. And also you get access to our CBI Clubhouse membership site, which has lots more info, articles, videos, special subscriber perks, all sorts of stuff. So that's where you get that. So celebrate. This is where we celebrate you guys. And I have 3 great celebrates this week. Gina Valance has just published her middle grade novel, Amberly and the Secret of the Fairy Warriors, with Friesen Press. And it's a middle grade fantasy that weaves themes of self-acceptance, personal empowerment, and overcoming adversity through an imaginative adventure story. So that is awesome. Congrats, Gina. And Sharon Henry is celebrating her new children's book, Just Fishing. It's a colorful 32-page rhyming book for kids, age 3 to 6, about a dad and 2 sons who go out fishing for dinner. So congratulations, Sharon. That's an awesome accomplishment. And not to be outdone, Mary Blackwell is celebrating the signing of 2 book contracts, one for a middle grade novel titled The Worry Not with Immortal Works, which is due out in 2022, and a picture book, Benton's Attention Invention, with Hearn Publications, to be released in 2024. So congrats, Mary. That's awesome. Awesome. I am so happy for all of you. So I want to hear your good news. Email mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and we will feature your news on a future Kidlit Distancing Social. No celebration is too small, and I mean that. We had Sharon in the chat box earlier say she finished the first draft of a book. That is worth celebrating. Yay, Sharon. So that's the kind of thing I want to hear too. And please put celebrate in the subject line, because I get a lot of emails and I try to sort them into appropriate inboxes. And if the subject line isn't obvious to me, it might go in the wrong place. And then it might take me a few weeks to actually see it. So celebrate in the subject line. And we will be happy to celebrate with you on a social. Okay, I have a couple really interesting links of interest for you today. So first of all, this blog post from the Writer Beware blog. 2 scams to watch out for: Writers Conference phishing scheme and Goodreads extortion scam. Just please go read this post by Victoria Strauss. It's amazing. Both of them really target published authors. So if you haven't published yet, just, be aware this stuff is out there. There's a phishing scheme where it sounds like they're approaching authors to speak at a writing conference, which happens. I mean, that's how authors often get approached, is via, their email. But it's not legit. And ultimately, they're going to ask the writers for their bank account info so that they can prepay them for the conference. And the Goodreads extortion scam is just horrendous. So just go read this post. I didn't even know this was going on. It's terrible. It's about basically these groups that threaten to post a whole bunch of one-star reviews if you don't pay them. And these authors haven't paid them, and so they've gotten bombed with one-star reviews, which then pushes their book way down in the ranking, and it's a mess. Anyway, that's what that's about. bit.ly/2scams is the direct link. And then this other great post, it's more uplifting. How to Face Down Writer Fear by C.S. Lakin on her Live, Write, Thrive blog. The direct link is bit.ly/writer fear. It's about not letting your fear hold you back from accomplishing your goals. And it's about imposter syndrome that a lot of us suffer from. And so that's a great post. You'll feel more empowered after reading that. Okay. And now I get to talk to my guest. So, Violet Lemay, author, illustrator. Violet has illustrated 40 books, 6 of which she also wrote. Her work primarily centers around board books for ages 0 to 4. She has worked with many publishers, including HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, Scholastic, Duo Press, Imagination Press, and Free Spirit Publishing. As an editorial illustrator, Violet contributed art to hundreds of magazines and newspapers. Her illustrations have won awards and recognition from American Illustration Annuals and Society of Illustrators in Los Angeles. And several of her books have landed on recommended book lists from places like Parents Magazine and School Library Journal. And this is really cool. 2 of her paintings are part of the permanent collection at the Museum of Children's Art and Books in Seoul, Korea. I think that's probably one of the coolest bio trivia info pieces of information I've had on the Distancing Social. So, a native of St. Louis, Violet and her family are expats who have lived in New Zealand, China, and Malaysia. So, Violet, welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social.
Hello.
Yay!
Hey.
Hi.
Hey, everybody.
So this is great, and it's so great that Shannon Anderson is here, who is
yes.
the author of one of the books you illustrated.
That's right. An amazing book, actually. A book that I wish had existed when I was a kid because it's incredibly helpful.
Yeah. So I think that's so fun that and people who are new to this business don't realize that the author and illustrator don't communicate during the process, the book creation process in most cases, for good reason. But often they only maybe after the fact get to email each other, but you really never, unless you
Yeah, it's a
both be at a
weird
conference.
fact of life.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So
Hmm.
so it's cool. I'm glad she could be here.
Yeah, it's
So
really.
yeah. So let's jump right in here. We have a lot to talk about tonight. So while you've illustrated for, picture books and activity books for kids all the way through even middle grade, your real sweet spot seems to be board books, which is great because we really haven't talked about board books on the social at all. So do you think you need a particular sort of sensibility or worldview to be able to write and illustrate for kids that young? I mean, we're talking under 4 years old.
Mhm. Well, I think yes, the short answer is yes. I think there's 3 parts to it because you have the child, the small child, and then the caregiver who's reading the book. And then the act of that happening, reading to a small child is such a precious, special, magical thing.
Mhm.
And I definitely feel that taking all 3 of those parts into account when you approach a board book is important.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And because you're writing for kids who have very little life experience and probably really short attention spans,
That's
um,
true.
there's probably, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on when we really get into more of the nitty gritty, but I'm thinking, you can't really mess around with lots of description and that kind of thing. You kind of just get right to it with your texts.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
at least in my experience, word books are also smaller typically than picture books.
Mhm.
And text takes up a lot of space, and pictures are supremely important um, for board books. So there's just really not a lot of room for a whole lot of text. The font size is typically larger also, and the page count is
The page
smaller.
count is shorter. Yeah. No, that's true. I didn't even think about that. But from I'm just going to show a page or two from one of your adorable board books here. So this is Healthy, Healthy, Love, Love, Love. We'll be talking about this a little more in a minute. But so here's a great page. And yes, there's not a lot of text on the page, and it is spread out so it does not get in the way of the illustrations. It's almost incorporated into the illustration because there's a lot of movement on this page. So, but also I can see when you've got a 3-year-old on your lap or a 2-year-old and you're reading this to them, you're going, okay, here's share, and then you have a picture of share. Here's play. Here's hug. So it does invite interaction with
It
the
does.
adult
It does.
and the child. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a nice story about that too. This is the same book.
Hmm.
This spread here,
Yes.
I I was able to share it with a friend whose toddler is this precious little girl, and when she's looking at the book, she was putting her hands on the hands, which was just
Oh,
the most marvelous. I mean, I didn't do that on purpose for sure, but what a great thing. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to remember that for future
oh,
books, just how interactive the book can be.
yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
I just have to respond. Alexine, if you're hearing an echo, it's probably because you have two windows open. So you might have Zoom open on two different windows. Or two different tabs. So see if that's your problem. And if not, remember you'll get the recording tomorrow and I don't hear an echo, so you can listen to it again. Okay, and I want to remind all of you too, if you have questions for Violet as we're talking, please put them in the Q&A and then we will get to them at the end. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this and another book. So this is from Harper. And your other book coming out in December called Let's Be Friends is also from Harper Festival. And
Yep.
they're both based on ideas that evolve from real life events.
Yes, they are.
So, can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
I will. I was expecting this question, so I put some slides together and I'm going to share my screen just to show you all a few things here. So here we go, screen share. And here we go. Okay, is everyone seeing my screen now?
Yep, we are.
Terrific. Okay, so yeah, my family and I were living in New Zealand in 2019. We had been there for over 4 years at that point. Beautiful place when very, very sadly, there was a shooting at a mosque in Christchurch. It was just completely terrible and heartbreaking, as you can imagine, because obviously those events always are. But for New Zealand, there's no gun violence in New Zealand, so it was such a shock and just so incredibly sad. It was like the bubble over this little Eden had been popped, you know. Oh my goodness, just terrible. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Let's see, Laura, I'm trying to advance my slides.
Um,
Oh, there it goes, it went. Okay, yeah, so I couldn't stop thinking about it, and obviously made me very sad, but also angry, honestly. I just kept wondering about why these things happen. Why
mhm.
does it matter that people are different?
Yeah.
It was just outrageous. You know, you really think about it.
Mhm.
Everybody's different, but why isn't it okay that we're just different, you know? And what does it matter that we look different or we have different preferences or we worship differently? Why do these things matter? And so my artist brain sort of channeled all of this into an idea for a book. And on the right there, that just shows some of my process of me figuring out what the book would be. But I actually decided this sort of in a flash when I was walking one day, that this would be a lift the flap board book called What Matters. And every time you turn the page, every spread would show different children, a lot of diversity, but every spread would show a different category of things. So these two children have this different preference, whatever it is. And the question is, does it matter? And then you lift the flap and the answer is obviously no, it doesn't matter. So anyway, figured out how many, in a board book, typically 22 to 24 pages, although that can really vary because board books are bound differently than other types of books, so the page count is flexible. But I figured on an 11 spread board book, 22 pages, 24 if you count the front and back cover. Wrote the whole thing, sketched it out, and besides being an illustrator and an author, I've also worked as an art designer and a designer of books, an art director and designer of books. So I have a lot of experience placing type in all of that. And for me, this is unique to me, but the way my brain works, it all sort of has to happen at the same time. So there's a lot of me going back and forth between different applications, importing my sketches into the layout, changing the words as I go. I don't know if this is a bad thing or a good thing, but I will change the words if they don't look right on the page to me and if they're not flowing correctly with the art. And I also will change the art, obviously, to accommodate the words, but I'm not beyond changing the words if I'm in a pickle, that's for sure. Anyway, so I finished this. I call it a book dummy, but it's not a physical paper dummy, just a PDF basically. And I'm going to show you an example of a PDF in just a minute of what that'll look like, the kind of book dummy I'm talking about. But anyway, I sent that to my agent and she liked it well enough to send it on to an editor at HarperCollins, who's someone I had worked with in 2017 and 18. And that editor liked it well enough to share it in a meeting. And I got a note back from her saying that the idea for the book generated a lot of discussion. And they were very intrigued by it. And they talked about it a lot, about the question, does it matter? But the conclusion they came to was that these things do matter. It obviously matters whether you're born rich or poor, because that was one of my original ideas that I put in the book that eventually got cut. The color of your skin, it matters, because all of these things obviously dictate your worldview and your life experience. So she sent me some requests for revision, said they were very interested, but I had to solve problems. She sent me bullet points of problems I had to fix. So sent me into a bit of a tizzy because I just didn't want to blow this chance. It was writing a book for a big publisher like that would have been amazing for me, just a new experience, and I really wanted them to buy the book. So I spent a month or two trying to sort it out and sent them back a revision, and eventually in the winter of 2019, HarperCollins bought the book, and by then my family had moved to China. And so I got the news when we were in China and was just so excited. And I have a big announcement, which is, I didn't think that the cover for this book was going to be revealed until next month, but I found out yesterday that it's already been released by HarperCollins, and I got permission to share it today. So, I'm about to show you the cover for the book. So yeah, it became a book called Let's Be Friends. And after trying many different approaches with my original manuscript to try to make it work in a way that I thought made me happy and would also make HarperCollins happy, I ultimately realized that the book was really about friendship, because those things do matter, but they shouldn't matter. They shouldn't affect friendship, right? So it's the same basic premise. The setup is the same. You see the children, different types of children on every spread, but the question is different. Can they be friends? And then you lift the flap and the answer is revealed, which I'll just leave to your imagination. It's positive, which was when I stumbled on that aspect of it, that the answer would be positive instead of negative. I was so excited. I knew that would be the way to go. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's a charming, lovely book. I'm very excited because even the aspect of religion made its way into the book, which was what inspired it in the first place. And even when I wrote the proposal for that, always thought, okay, that's going to be one of the final spreads and I'll make it optional, because you don't really see that in a book.
Mm-hmm.
It's, a direct, like,
Right.
religion,
Right.
just in a book. World religions. Anyway, I mean, you do in certain books, but generally I think not.
Well, this
But
is
they never brought it up.
this is a
And so,
great cover, by the way. There's a lot of people in the chat box just commenting on it.
well,
It's
thanks
really
everybody.
it's really cute and appealing and very you get so drawn in and you want to go all the way around the circle and see how the kids are all connecting with each other all the way around the circle. I love it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Actually, a lot of these little kids are little ones that I know in the community where we live here. My husband works at an American international boarding school, and the faculty and their families live here. And a lot of these little ones are children of the faculty members here at the school that I got to meet once we moved here to Malaysia.
That's
So
great.
I don't know, it's nice.
That's awesome.
Anyway, yeah, but this book was inspired by this terrible event.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you'd never know that by looking at it. It just became something very different. And I hope the original message is intact. I think it is. I can't really show you anything from the interior yet, but just, I don't know, keep your eyes open for it. I'll be posting tons about it in the coming months, but I'm excited about this one for sure. Anyway, so meanwhile, I mentioned my family moved to China.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were in China, not long after my son and I arrived, actually, my husband had gone ahead of us. He was there for several months before we joined him. But my son suffered a completely unexpected, out of left field, and extremely serious health crisis. It was very scary. This all happened during Chinese New Year, so it was January of 2020.
Wow.
And this was before COVID. This was not a COVID-related incident, but it did involve my son's lungs, and he ended up in the respiratory unit of a hospital in China. And the way it works there is a family member has to stay with the patient. So I lived in the hospital with my son for 1 week. It only took 1 week. He had 2 surgeries. He's totally fine. He recovered completely eventually.
That's great.
And we were released a week later. But that week was so stressful,
Yeah.
and also just fascinating. I mean, we were there in China and couldn't speak the language, and because it was Chinese New Year, everyone that we knew had left. So we had no one to translate for us, and there was very little English of any substance at all in the hospital. And the family is expected to really help out with things. And I didn't know that. No one told me that. I just sort of figured it out as the week unfolded, but so many crazy things happened.
Yeah.
So here is a photo of the hospital. I'm not going to show you more pictures, but I'll show you some sketches. I had a book deadline, and I was also still finishing up little tweaks on the manuscript for Let's Be Friends, which was called What Matters at that point. I think at this point, HarperCollins had already bought the book, but we were still like ironing out a few little things. But yeah, I was working on this book, and both HarperCollins and the publisher of this book, which is called I Can Be Like, a Book of Masks of Inspiring Women, which is Duo Press. They were so gracious. They're like, Violet, you don't need to be working. But for me, I had to keep working because it just kept my mind in a happy
You
place.
have to focus on something. Yeah. Yeah.
My son he's a musician. He's just completely wrapped up in listening to his music. And I was there with him, never left his side, but I had to have something to do. So yeah, I was working. But also I was sketching like crazy, and I'm not a big journaler, but I wrote down everything while we were in that hospital. I just didn't want to forget anything. Just for family history, I guess, and because when you're in a serious medical situation, I can't remember that stuff. I was in sort of panic mode anyway, so I was just trying to write down everything they told me, and then just all the ridiculously crazy things that I saw in this hospital, because it's just so different than anything I ever could have imagined. The healthcare system and the way everything is handled is just so different. It was fascinating. And so yes, I was constantly sketching my poor baby. Here he is. He's fine. He's totally fine. No, but sketching him.
Yeah.
And everything that was going on. And then COVID happened. 2 days before we were released from the hospital, we were asked to start wearing masks, and we were 500 miles away from Wuhan. But as you can imagine, this was scary. We were in the respiratory ward for one thing. Oh my goodness, just crazy times. Anyway, yeah, so we were released from the hospital finally on Chinese New Year.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, next. After that, we returned unexpectedly to New Zealand. My son was scheduled to begin University of Auckland as a freshman. He wanted to get back, and we wanted him to get back for his orientation. And because of everything that had just happened to him, and because everyone was telling us to get out of China, including my husband's employer, we bugged out. And it was, the hospital was stressful. I don't know which one was worse, actually, was trying to get out of China or the hospital. The whole thing was just a giant ball of terrifying stress.
Wow.
And so I just kept working because that was my happy place. And when we got to New Zealand, and my husband and I were homeless. My son was situated in the dorm, but we had nowhere to go, and the future was completely a giant question mark. So we just started staying in Airbnbs, which, after the fact, I can tell you lasted for 9 months of Airbnb hopping, which sounds like paradise, but when you're doing that unexpectedly and you're homeless and there's a lockdown,
Yeah, that's
and travel is scary. It was just crazy. Anyway, so during that time, I was working on other books, and I was refining the sketches that I made in the hospital and looking at all of this stuff that I'd written and thinking about how I could turn it into a book, maybe like a book for older kids. I'm not my little writer, definitely not, that would be new for me, but I mean, I wouldn't have literally written about my son, but I was thinking I could somehow fictionalize the story and make it into a young adult novel, or maybe even a graphic novel. So I sent all of these sketches and my idea to my agent. Here's another final illustration I made. Oh, just as a side note, when we started, the first day we stayed in the hospital, we shared a room with this lovely older Chinese gentleman whose entire extended family was in the tiny, tiny hot room with us the whole time.
Oh my gosh.
It was just stuff like this. Like, it was just so crazy. Oh my word.
Oh.
Amazing. Anyway, I sent it all to my agent, and she wrote me back this: I think you should stick with what you do best. Young and maybe a board book, maybe how to be safe mixed with tolerance. And that last line is what really got me, because we had been living in China for a while. We had acquired so many friends there, and people had been incredibly gracious, and just everyone bending over backwards to help us. Mm-hmm. Not least of which were the people in the hospital, the medical people who helped me and helped my son during this crisis. And it wasn't just them, though. It was everyone we met was so incredible. And then to hear this new virus called the China virus in a derogatory way was another thing that made me angry. It really did. And anyway, all of this swirl of stuff, and then the note from my agent, it was like, this was the book I was born to write, was this book that she described. Maybe you should stick with what you do best, young and maybe a board book, maybe how to be safe mixed with tolerance. So I just took off like a rocket from that direction. And within a week, I had written and sketched out the entire book and made a dummy. And these are some early thumbnail sketches you can see here. I cut them out so that I could move them around to try to figure out the best sort of flow and pace for the information that I wanted to include in the book. And then I made a book dummy, which, as I wrap this up, I'm just going to quickly scroll through so you can see what I mean when I'm talking about a book dummy. So yeah, I sent it to her. This was my original proposed, I guess. I was thinking title page or cover. I don't know what I was thinking with this. It didn't end up making it into the book. And my sketches I made in 2 colors, orange and black, which was, again, new to me, not something I'd ever tried, but I just like the way it looks, so I kind of rolled with it. Mm-hmm. And also, I don't know if this is my first take at this. I can't remember, but it's one of the very early editions of this idea. Anyway, I sent it to my agent. She liked it very much and said she would send it out immediately, which she did. And I didn't know this, but she sent it to the very same editor who had bought Let's Be Friends. And she loved it. Again, sent me back request for revision, which I made immediately from some Airbnb in New Zealand and sent them back to her. And they bought the book with the stipulation that I could complete the art in 6 weeks, which is very, very fast for a
Yeah.
book contract. But I did it. I was obviously thrilled to sign the contract. And I mean, I had other books I was working on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, by the way. That's the end of that. So let me figure that out. Yeah, I had other books I was working on, but I was, of course, thrilled to, yeah, am I back? Yeah.
Yep.
Thrilled to sign the contract and do the book. And then, yeah, so here it is. It was released a few months ago. Yay.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, thank.
And yeah, and again, it doesn't have really anything to do with our hospital experience in China. But the thing that I hope remained in the book was the tolerance part, which
Mhm.
was more important to me than anyone, I feel. I feel like everyone who was contributing to the book, because there were many wonderful people who put their heads together to help me do this, but everyone had sort of a different main idea that they wanted the book to share. And mine was the love aspect.
Mhm.
So anyway, I hope it's still in there.
I think it is, and I was on that same page. Oh
Yeah,
my God, I love
yeah.
this page. First of all, I'm really glad your son is okay. That is an incredible story, and I can just imagine as a parent myself how, and my son's about the same age, but it doesn't matter if they're in their teens or 20s. You're still like you want to take care of them when they're sick, and oh my gosh, and in another country. So I'm really glad it all turned out.
Yeah, thank you. It
And
was
I
quite.
think, yeah, and I think you're going to get a lot of stories out of that experience. I think you probably still are processing a lot of it.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to get more books out of it. But I think it's very interesting that your agent said stick with what you do well, and that was a smart agent.
He's
But
great.
also, I think in both these books that you've talked about, you took a big abstract concept, um, and you picked a part of it that is very accessible to the board book audience and really
Mhm.
made that the cornerstone of the book. So love is in this.
Mhm.
If you say to kids tolerance, if you say to a 3-year-old, we must be tolerant, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about. But if you say, love your friend, they understand that. So I
Mhm.
think that's great that you use that word specifically because kids know that word. And the
That's great.
same way with Let's Be Friends. You were talking about tolerance again there,
Mhm.
um, but also there was racism. There was all sorts of stuff going on in that inspired you. Again, big ideas that the board book age isn't necessarily going to understand, but Let's
Mhm.
Be Friends, they get that. And then,
Yeah.
and again, you can piggyback then off that very simple idea and sort of expand it into we could be friends with this person and this person and this person. And I think that's really key when you're writing for the youngest age like this, is finding that meaning that they already understand and using that as a bridge to the bigger idea.
So true, Laura. That's very well said. Can't
Yeah.
agree with you more.
And that is not as easy as it sounds, to do. Um, like you said, you went through a whole draft of Let's Be Friends, a completely different type of idea before you got to where you are.
Oh,
Um,
yes. It was creative panic, really. I mean, uh, yeah, I'm not sure how it happens, honestly. For me, it's the words and the pictures and the design all together at the same time, and it is so fun, and it just draws me in absolutely like nothing else really does, or nothing else really can.
mhm,
But yeah, it's kind of like being in the zone, I guess. You just have to get in the zone. And
right.
I don't know. I feel like there aren't many things I do well in life. I hope I do this well, but I can do it. It's something I can do. It's like the thing I can do.
You do it very well.
Okay.
So, when you are, I'm talking about the books that you're writing specifically, are you concerned? Is it important to always be upbeat, positive, cheerful in tone? Because again, you're dealing with the youngest kids here. Are you conscious of that?
I am very conscious of that. Also, I don't think I could do anything but that. I don't know. I don't even like to watch sad movies or read sad books because the sadness in me, I'm very sensitive and it just lingers.
Mhm.
So I don't think I could help because I have this precious love for little kids, you know, and I want to just love them, just hug them. And I want to give them books that feel like love and a hug. And that's happy and light and bright. And yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's just what I would naturally do. I certainly respect anyone who could make a charming book for little kids that was not quite so bright and happy and charming. But yeah, speaking of somebody's wheelhouse, that's
Yeah.
that's my that's my space.
Right. Well, and again, you can take big ideas, big topics, stuff that comes from a place of pain, and still find a hopeful way or positive way of talking about that with young kids, and I think you've done that.
Well,
Um,
I hope
and
so.
yeah, yeah. Do you worry at all about like word count, or do you just automatically write very short?
Yeah, I don't really count the words. I
Mhm.
do if I'm trying to work on something for anything else, a blog
Right.
post, a manuscript or something else. But for these, for me, I'm extremely visual and it's just visual. And also I've worked on so many board books that I can kind of tell at a glance
Mhm.
when I'm looking at the layout, this is about how many words they're
Right.
going to put in. It just is an interesting note though about this one. Actually, about both the books I did for HarperCollins, coming to think of it. This book I designed and wrote as a 6 by 6 inch board book. And I was so careful when I was placing the text and figuring out, just I was explaining earlier, all of that is important to me, how it works on the page and all that.
Mhm.
And then I sent all the final files and then you wait for the book to come out. And when I finally got the book, I was like, seems a little big. I didn't measure it or anything, but I was like, I don't know, maybe it's my imagination. And then I came to find that they actually ended up making it a 7 inch by 7 inch board book,
Uh-huh.
which if I had known that from the start, the text might be much different because there would have been more space for it. I might have added more words. And then the other one, Let's Be Friends, I proposed as a larger book and they decided to make it smaller.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so, if you had known the size, would you have done anything different with the illustrations, or
I
uh,
think I think probably just as a matter of the natural way that it happens, I bet it would look a little different. I think the words probably might be a little different. I'm super happy. I could not be more happy with it.
Mhm.
I'm so glad it turned out the way it did. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Any factor that changes is going to affect, like a ripple effect, everything else. So I'm sure it would have looked a little bit different. Yeah.
Right, right. So, what about you've also illustrated a lot of books written by other people, or like with Duo Press, you've done quite a few books for them. Do they sort of come up with the concept of the book, their editorial team, and then hire an illustrator, or how does like this, the Obamas? Um, did did you write the text of this one, or you
I
did?
wrote that one. I
Okay.
wrote that one and proposed it to Duo Press, and they decided graciously to publish that book. But I've illustrated many other books for Duo Press
Yes.
that were written by other people.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. Okay. This
yeah,
one, for example, I want to get back to the Obama one for a sec in a second. So this one, Bookstore Babies, someone else
yeah,
wrote and you illustrated. So is this experience a lot different for you if you are not writing the words?
it is.
Different creative
Yeah,
experience.
it's different for sure. It's it's a different kind of experience. I was going to say there's not as much pressure. It's sort of a different kind of pressure, but it's definitely different. And sometimes, both ways of working are good though.
Hmm.
I really like the getting into my own little personal cocoon of creativity and making my own project where I'm doing almost everything myself. But it's wonderful to be able to uh, interact with other creative people and
Hmm.
get their ideas. And I miss that when I'm working on my own stuff. I wish there was somebody here I could just say, would you just look over my shoulder and tell me what you think of this or that?
Yeah.
But yeah, working on something that someone else has written is completely different because there are so many other people involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this, I want to talk a little bit about this. So the Obamas, this is a Lift the Flap book. And this is so cool because I love the design of it. Just the text is such an important part of the art. And I bet that was really fun
It was
to
so fun.
put together. So again, we've got this really big topic, the Obamas, distill this down for like a preschooler in a way that's meaningful to them. How did you decide which things you were going to include in this book?
Yeah, that's actually, just as a little side note, that I proposed that book as something completely different also, and it became
Huh.
this Lift the Flap book. But I think, well, I researched the Obamas like crazy, obviously, and researched art styles that I liked for the book, and wanted to sort of emulate kind of like a graffiti art style. It turned out looking nothing like that, but the big words and paying special attention to the typography was something that appealed to me. And as I was boiling all this down, and I proposed this book from so many different angles, Laura, I proposed it as a counting book, as, I don't know, so many other things. As more like a straight biography with illustrations. But yeah, as I boiled all that down and got feedback from the publisher who liked the idea, but wasn't sold on any of the formats I was trying, I finally decided to focus on just a few words and use them as anchors for every spread. So that each spread would focus on a different aspect of the Obamas, using hopefully meaningful, powerful, short words. And that way I thought that each spread could be kind of like a celebration of that word and that aspect of that family and their time in the Oval Office.
That's great. And then it's also a Lift the Flap book. So did you actually design where the flaps were going to go and all of that?
I did. I designed the flaps. I don't think it always goes that way, but again, I have unfortunately I have too much experience with all these different aspects of making a book, but because I'm a former art director and designer, there was a different designer for this book, or maybe a different art director for this book. I can't remember. I either was credited as the designer or the art director for that book. I don't remember. My friend Tyler was helping me. He had the other role. But yeah, it was me who figured out where to put the flaps. And I thought it would be really cool and fun to incorporate the type in the flaps, which I thought would be unique. And anyway, yeah, it was me. I don't think it's always the illustrator, but I feel like the illustrator would play a role, even if the illustrator doesn't have the final say in where the flaps go. But I think it would probably be a conversation between the art director, the designer, and the illustrator. That's what I would imagine.
I imagine so as well. Yeah. Well, it's just a really visually interesting and just fun book to look at.
Okay.
My son is an artist, and his big thing is fonts. He designs fonts, and so I'm going to show him this because he's going to
Oh,
love
that's
it.
cool.
And he also loves street art and does his own street art as well. So I
That's
think he will appreciate your influences there.
nice. That's really great.
Yeah. Um, quick question, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A here. But so you live overseas. How is that? How has that been working with U.S. publishers? Has that been an easy experience? Are there difficulties?
Well, I will say one of the main reasons I'm a former art director is because that was a job I had a difficult time maintaining with different time zones, and for many other reasons, just personal reasons. But so like if you had a normal job for the United States and you wanted to live overseas and you had to interact with people who are on a different time schedule, it could be prohibitive. It could be, for me as a creative person, that was awful because I was waking up and everyone was already at the end of their day and I was just starting my day. So my day had to begin with handling whatever was waiting for me that had like stacked up throughout everyone else's day. But that's my most creative time, is the morning. And so I tried to keep that job for years, but I just couldn't give up my mornings anymore. It was starting to really have a negative effect on me. But being an illustrator or an author or a freelancer of any kind, then it's great because it doesn't matter at all that you're traveling around. It just really doesn't matter as long as you can find an internet connection and a table, which doesn't sound like it would be hard to find, but the Airbnb New Zealand experience taught me that Airbnb is not built for work. It's built for people who are sometimes there just not even be a table. It was crazy. But yeah, as long as there's internet and a table, you're good to go. Because usually people don't need to hear from you right away. They usually just don't. And especially in publishing, my goodness, sometimes, you know, sometimes things are rush, but mostly there are huge delays after I send an email before I hear back from anyone. So yeah, it's a great way to make a living while seeing the world at the same time.
Absolutely. So do you do all your art digitally then?
I do, although I incorporate traditional media. In the Obama book, for example, I painted some big acrylic sheets of textures or just the basic background for some of those spreads and then scanned it in. And I work in Photoshop. Photoshop is my big thing. So it's sometimes a blend, but mostly digital. I started with digital art about, oh my goodness, I was going to say 5 years ago, but by now I think it's longer than that. Maybe 6 or 7 or even 8 years ago. And the learning curve was steep for me for sure, but I'm so glad. I'm so glad I did it. Because I don't think an illustrator has to be a digital illustrator. I think the most important thing is that your work is beautiful and is just as good as you can make it. But for me, I'm part of an illustration agency, and that's very fast paced, and I work a lot. I get a lot of jobs. My agent is amazing. I'm so blessed, and I know it. But because I work a lot, I work more quickly digitally, and I'm sure other of your guests have also said this, that when it comes time to do revisions, which are inevitable, taking care of that digitally is so much easier and faster than working the old way. And also the other thing is, although the big publishers, I've heard from other people, including some of your guests, will have you ship your art to them and that they have people who will scan it and color correct it and all that stuff. That is not the case for all of the many other jobs I've had from publishers who are smaller or magazine work or whatever like that. I don't think most of those places even have a staff that deals with scans and color correction and all that like it used to be. I'm now, for the most part, at least in my experience, and again, this is just me, but I've been doing this for a long time, but it is just me. My experience is that you are expected to send a scan and they give you requirements for the scan. So my advice for illustrators is if you're a traditional illustrator, that's amazing, be great at it, and just take a Photoshop class so that you can learn to scan your work and correct it. I've had traditional art published of mine where on the other end, I was expecting that they would make simple corrections like, you know, remove this little piece of cat hair or a fluff or whatever, and they didn't even do it. So it will give you that kind of control. You can control it on your end.
Right.
That way, if anything goes wrong, you know, at least it was you and you don't have to be mad at anybody else because your cat hair ended up printed in the book.
Okay, I meant to do that. That was deliberate.
It's part of the legend of the book. Can you find it?
Yeah, really. Can you find the cat hair? That's funny. That's funny. Okay, so let's get to some questions here. Someone asked your newest book, The Let's Be Friends. Is this a board book? Yes, it is. It will be a board book coming out in December, right?
Yeah, actually, it was supposed to be coming out in the spring of 22 when it was purchased. That's what I was told. But then the marketing department at HarperCollins thought it would be a good idea to release it before Valentine's Day because they think they have a tie-in for Valentine's. So they moved up the schedule by 6 months, which was exciting. And again, it was like, okay, red alert. I guess this is what I'm doing now, is cranking out the book as fast as I possibly can. But yeah, so exciting. It's going to be released. I think, well, I heard yesterday that it will be released in bookstores on the 24th, but the pub date is, I think, the 1st of December. So the release date in stores 14th, not the 24th, the 14th of
Okay.
December. But you can get it online sooner,
Online
the
first.
1st of December.
Great. Um, let's see. One of our anonymous attendees asks, I've heard that publishers can create a board book out of a picture book, but aren't wild about authors sending a manuscript for a board book. Any recommendations? So you have an agent, so you're established, so you don't have to deal quite as much with just the whims of the market. Um,
I
but
don't
what
know
are your
about
thoughts
that.
on that? Mm-hmm.
I I don't see why you couldn't submit a manuscript for a board book. Um, I feel like there are editors who specialize in board books and are looking for manuscripts for board books.
And imprints. I mean,
If that's the thing that they do. I mean, maybe they're also so skilled at this, which obviously they are, that they can look at a picture book manuscript and say, oh, this would be much better as a board book. But I don't think there's anything, I would think there's nothing wrong with sending a
yeah,
picture.
I wouldn't. I think well, first of all, yes, there are places doing board books. For example, Harper Festival. Festival is an imprint of HarperCollins that does board books and young stuff. Now, again, you need an agent to get in there, but it exists. Duo Press, who published, it's part of Workman Publishing. They, you do a lot of stuff for them. They are taking submissions. I looked on their
They
website.
are. DuoPress, everyone is amazing,
Mm-hmm.
amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
Such a great publisher, incredible people, super small group of incredible people. And yeah, they're taking submissions. They don't exclusively make board books. They're a
Right.
small company
Lots
that
of
is bigger and bigger and bigger. They've had lots of success and are growing a lot. And I know that they're looking for manuscripts. And I think it would be important when you're submitting to anyone to look at the kinds of books that they publish, the kinds of board books that they
absolutely.
publish, and
Yeah,
then tailor your idea to what they like.
exactly. Because
Yeah, as
Duo
a matter of
Press,
fact, go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there, but I noticed Duo Press does a lot of sort of activity test type stuff and stuff like this that's kind of based in real life, everyday life stuff that kids would see in the world, you know.
Right. Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what it is. So that book is part of the local baby series, which began with New York Baby, then Chicago Baby, San Francisco Baby, Southern Babies, which I wrote, and then broadened into bookstore babies and library babies. So it was in that local theme, but Duo Press is very interested in that local book
Mm-hmm.
idea.
Yeah.
And I have a good story about that from a friend of mine, Amy Mullen, who's a designer slash illustrator. She's amazing. You all should look her up and follow her on Instagram. She's incredible. But she knew this about DuoPress just from her own research. And she decided to make a proposal for a book about color. And she made it local. And I met her when she was working on what became a series of books for DuoPress about colors from different areas of the country,
Wow.
colors of the Southwest, colors of this and that. And so much so that I thought she was from the area of the country where her original book idea was from. But I asked her about it. She said, no, she just researched, what was like a trend in local board books. And she chose the Portland area, even though she was from somewhere else. And she proposed that book to DuoPress and totally loved it. And then it became, she's done many, many books for DuoPress now, and I'm sure she'll do many more. She's incredible. But yeah, I think that's such a good tip, is to really look carefully at what the publisher, especially small publishers, what they're publishing, and read all those books and just kind of be absorbed into them and see how you can kind of tag on to them. Because more illustrators than me have illustrated in that local baby series, for example. And there are other examples in different categories in books from DuoPress as well, where you could sort of like, you could look at a series of books and present an idea about how this could possibly follow along in that same series, or maybe a series would inspire something similar but not the same.
Right.
And you suggest that.
Great idea. So yeah, people have asked, it's Duo Press, Duo
PRESS. The website is duopressbooks.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So check them out. But the question about publishers turning picture books into board books, yes, they do that. If it's a popular picture book, they'll create a board book format of it. But that is not the same thing as original
No,
book
it's,
books.
yeah, that's something
You know?
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think publishers are doing this, and I see more and more. I think board books kind of for a while kind of went down, or they were doing a lot of those. Let's just turn picture books into board books. But I'm seeing way more original board books now than I did in the past. So I think that's very exciting.
Something else that DuoPress does that other publishers do as well that might be a great way for an illustrator who's listening to propose a book idea would be to propose a book about a high contrast book for infants, because those are really growing in popularity. I've done a few of those and they're easy. It's just black and white. But oh my goodness, it's so rewarding to see the people send me photos of their infants with the books. And I don't know if it was like this for you, Laura, but when my son was a baby, he just could not stop looking at anything black and white. We had a chessboard and he was just fascinated by it. His eyes just like soaking it in. And it's a really easy way to propose a book because they're very simple. So you can have a high contrast book that has little, if no type. I illustrated a fold out book for DuoPress that's a tummy time mat. It's high contrast on one side and full color on the other side, and there are no words. It's just art, and every panel is a different simple image, and there are mirrors, which is like a funky twist on it. But just a regular old high contrast book might be a good way to get started.
Yeah, great tip. Okay, I wish I could draw. I would love to do that. Sharon asks, are there usually more art notes in board books as compared to picture books if the author isn't an author illustrator? So if you're illustrating someone else's text, are there art notes involved?
There are art notes. I get art notes. I don't think there are more art notes. You know what this really depends on is the art director of the book. And there are a wide range of people with all different personalities, and so sometimes there are copious, very specific art notes. And it can be like put you in panic mode because it's this list of all these things they want. Yeah. It usually turns out to be fine, but it just looks like so much. And then sometimes it's like, over these 2 pages, draw a bowling alley scene. The end. And then you have to figure out the rest. So it really, to me, it just depends on the personality of the art director. Because even if the author puts the art notes in, it's the art director and the editor who work together that they might take your art notes out and replace them.
Right.
They might. I also, from working at DuoPress, I know that is not always the case. Sometimes they really, really value art notes from authors and they stay in. So it just really depends on the situation, I think.
Okay. Here's a question, and let's see if we can figure this out. I'm not sure I understand this question. This is from owner. So on the Obama book, I love the text and creative font. I have a book that I am interested in, the text being bigger than life as yours was. So, similar use of text on the page. I just don't know how to do it. Can you tell me how you do this to submit it to the publisher? So again, because you wrote and illustrated this, did you create the dummy and then send that in to convey the concept? So suppose you're a writer, you're not also an illustrator, but you envision this kind of thing. Do you have that much?
I think if I was just going to submit a manuscript for that book, I would, of course, write the text and then for the spread, and I would put that word in a big font. I mean, not a big, super fancy font. Right. I would use just a larger font size, put it in bold, and maybe a general art note that's outside of the manuscript in the proposal. I would say my idea is to rely heavily on typography as art. And it will be indicated in a larger font size in the manuscript, just something real simple like that. Okay, I think people, we're all used to reading manuscripts. The people who are receiving the manuscript can visualize all this. They don't need
Right.
Choo-choo mob, I think. So yeah, just keep it simple.
Keep it simple. I like that because yes, the people who will be reading this do this for a living. And so
Yes,
they just need a little bit of guidance and then they'll get what you're going for. Yeah,
100%.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you
Mhm.
come across as being too much of a micromanager, that is not going to sit well either. So
Yeah, for me, that does, as an artist, that doesn't, I wish I could say, I'm a pretty patient person, but a whole lot of art notes for me, it just makes me feel, oh,
yeah,
well, sometimes if I'm super busy and I get a whole bunch of art notes, I kind of relax because I think, great, my brain doesn't really have to work. I
right.
can read these art notes and go with the art notes, but
Mhm.
then that cuts the project off from whatever ideas I might have had, So I feel like if you write too many art notes and your art notes make it to the illustrator, you might be the project will be different than if you let the illustrator contribute.
Yeah,
Because the illustrator, just as much as you're trying to write the best possible book you can, and you've taken all these classes, studied it in school, been writing for years, illustrators, same thing, but for illustration, we study so hard, we learn from incredibly talented people, we have all this experience handling visual problems, the whole idea of making art flow with text, and we might see something, a way to handle this that
right.
you would never in a million years think of.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. You have to let the creative people create in whatever way they can. And really, and I've said this on other socials, when you're working in the board book and picture book arena, the words are half the product, the illustrations are the other half. And so you have to really have that collaborative mindset going into it. No one person is in control of the entire book unless you're the author illustrator. Then, you get to call all the shots. But well,
And usually though, even then there will probably be an art director saying,
exactly, exactly,
you
exactly.
rethink that. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm just going to ask one more question here because we've kept you beyond the hour and I appreciate it. Sheila says, has your art style and media evolved from the places you've lived? Have you been influenced by all these other cultures that you've lived in?
Yes, I think it would probably be impossible not to be influenced. I can see it. I don't know if it's such a big shift that anyone else can see it. I certainly am interested in drawing plants and palm trees all of a sudden ever since we moved to Malaysia. I just can't get enough of like a lush tropical background.
Oh,
But other things too, for example, and this is just a whole separate issue. I won't get into it at length, but showing different cultures and races in illustration is always a thing, and everybody has a different opinion about it. And it kind of depends on who you're working with, how far they want you to take it. Like, when does this become a caricature? How
right,
subtle does this need to be? You want to show differences respectfully and with love and care and all of that. But when we were living in China, the thing that impressed me most was that there were all these, as in any city, there's big posters all over the place, and some of them beautifully illustrated. And in these highly stylized illustrations, you would never know that you were looking at illustrations of Asian people. They were just simple shapes, no special treatment given to any facial features, just
mm-hmm.
simple. Just, and so when I was working on the art for Let's Be Friends, at first I approached it that way, and I tried to keep all my drawings identical and just sort of change the colors and the hairs, different hairstyles, smooth or curly, whatever. But then after some time away from China and like getting back into a different culture, and as that book progressed, and racism against Asian cultures was getting worse, I wanted to make sure, I wanted people to understand when they were looking at the book that I had included, for real, like really included Asian people along with everybody else. And so I did go back and I made some little adjustments
Mm-hmm.
so that there was a more obvious, so that they were more obviously Asian. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really tricky thing. But living around the world has definitely changed the way I approach that. I think about it very carefully when I'm working on it.
Yeah, I bet. I bet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Well, we are seeing there's a lot of great comments in the chat box about how much people have enjoyed this evening, and I have too. So thank you so much, Violet, for sharing so much of your experience with us and your work, and for creating these wonderful books.
Well,
It's
thank
just
you, Laura. Yeah, and thank you for these, for what you all do, and thank you for everything on the CBI website and the writing blueprints and just the whole thing. You and John are incredible, and I know I'm not the only one here tonight who feels that way, but we're just all so grateful. So
oh,
thank
well,
you.
thank you very much. Okay, well, it's been great and we appreciate it. And now you get to go have a great day while we're all getting ready for bed.
Have a good night, everyone. I'm going to go eat breakfast.
All right. And I'll see you all
Okay.
next week. Thanks for joining
Okay.
us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.